There's a guy, let's call him Kevin. 2 years ago, Kevin was selling enterprise software, making a decent living, but stuck in the endless grind of corporate America. He didn't come from money. He didn't have an Ivy League degree. He didn't own a single major asset besides his slightly used BMW. Last year, Kevin cleared over $2 million in profit. He did it without creating a product, without hiring a single employee, and without ever leaving his home office in Scottsdale, Arizona. What does he sell? Nothing you can touch. He sells access. He sells time. Kevin is a private jet charter broker, and he's part of a shadow industry that is quietly reshaping the entire landscape of luxury travel in the United States. This isn't a story about the ultra-rich. You already know their story. They buy the jets, they fly on the jets. This is the story of the people in the middle, the invisible architects of luxury, the connectors, the deal makers, the people with nothing more than a powerful laptop and an even more powerful contact list, who are building empires by connecting wealthy people who need a flight with jet owners who have an empty plane. This is the story of the rise of the private jet charter broker, and over the next 10 parts, we are going to pull back the curtain on one of the most lucrative, misunderstood, and fastest-growing industries in America. You're going to learn exactly how this business works from the ground up. Not the fluff you see on reality TV, but the real mechanics. How do they find clients? How do they find the jets? How do they make money on a single phone call that would take most people a year to earn? We'll explore the seismic shifts, from the pandemic fallout to the complete collapse of trust in commercial airlines, that have poured rocket fuel on this industry. By the end of this series, you will understand the private aviation ecosystem better than 99% of the population, and you'll see the hidden opportunities that are emerging every single day. So, what exactly is a broker? Imagine you're a successful CEO in New York. You and 3 executives need to be in Los Angeles for a critical meeting tomorrow morning, and then in San Francisco for dinner that same night. Flying commercial is a nightmare. The delays, the security lines, the lack of privacy. It's a logistical disaster that costs you your most valuable asset, time. You need a private jet, but you don't own one. Buying a $60 million Gulfstream G650 that you'll only use 150 hours a year is a terrible financial decision. That's where the broker comes in. You make one phone call. You tell the broker you need a jet for 4 passengers, from Teterboro to Van Nuys, tomorrow at 8 a.m. The broker immediately gets to work. They aren't calling a single airline. They are tapping into a vast, real-time digital network of every available, certified private aircraft in the country. They see a jet owner in New Jersey whose plane is just sitting on the tarmac, costing him hundreds of thousands a month in hangar fees, insurance, and crew salaries. Your trip to California is pure profit for that owner. The broker negotiates the price. They arrange the catering, the ground transportation, the flight plans. They handle the contracts, the insurance verification, every single detail. They present you with a simple all-in price. Let's say $45,000. You say yes. The flight happens flawlessly. You, the client, are happy. The jet owner, who just made money on an otherwise idle asset, is happy. And the broker? They just made a commission, typically between 10 and 25%. On that one flight, they could have pocketed anywhere from $4,000 to over $10,000. Now imagine they do that 2 or 3 times a week. The math starts getting very, very interesting. This is the core of the business. It's a high-stakes, high-value arbitrage of information and access. The broker owns no planes. They take on no risk of maintenance or crew costs. They are the ultimate asset-light business model, built for the digital age. But this isn't new, so why is it exploding right now? The answer is a perfect storm of factors. First, the pandemic fundamentally changed how the wealthy and even the moderately affluent view travel. Health concerns, privacy, and control became paramount. The germ tube of a commercial airliner became deeply unappealing. Suddenly, the idea of chartering a small jet with a few colleagues or family members shifted from an absurd luxury to a practical, albeit expensive, solution. This opened the floodgates to a whole new tier of customers who had never previously considered private aviation. Second, the epic meltdown of the commercial airline industry. The constant cancellations, the staff shortages, the lost baggage, the endless chaos. It's created a crisis of confidence. For a business traveler, a single canceled flight can cost them a multi-million-dollar deal. The risk is too high. The reliability of private charter has become its single greatest selling point. You fly on your schedule, not the airlines. This reliability is something corporate America is willing to pay a massive premium for. And third, technology. What used to be an opaque industry run by a few old-school guys with Rolodexes has been blown wide open by software. New platforms allow brokers to see real-time availability and pricing across thousands of aircraft. It's created transparency and efficiency that never existed before. This tech enablement means a smart, hungry entrepreneur, like our friend Kevin from Scottsdale, can compete with established, decades-old firms from day one. The barriers to entry have been obliterated. But don't be mistaken. It's not as simple as just getting a website and calling yourself a broker. This is a business built on trust, reputation, and an almost fanatical attention to detail. When you're dealing with C-suite executives, celebrities, and high-net-worth families, one mistake can be catastrophic. A flight delay isn't an inconvenience. It's a breach of contract. The wrong kind of champagne on board isn't a small error. It's a sign you don't understand your client. This industry is dividing into distinct camps. You have the lone wolf brokers, who build a small, fiercely loyal client list and offer incredibly personalized white glove service. They become a trusted travel advisor, almost like a family member. Then you have the boutique brokerages, small teams of 10 to 50 people who combine technology with that high-touch service, aiming for a larger volume of clients. And finally, you have the tech giants, the big venture capital-backed platforms that are trying to become the Uber of private jets. They focus on volume, slick apps, and standardized service, sometimes at the expense of that personal touch. Each of these models has its own strengths, weaknesses, and secrets to success, and we will dissect all of them. We'll look at the rise of jet cards and membership programs, a financial innovation that has completely changed how people buy private flight hours. Instead of chartering trip by trip, clients can now pre-purchase 25 or 50 hours on a specific type of jet, offering them fixed pricing and guaranteed availability. It's a brilliant marketing tool that has created a recurring revenue model in an industry that was once purely transactional. And who is at the center of selling and managing these programs? The brokers. The United States is, without a doubt, the largest and most dynamic private aviation market in the world. It accounts for nearly 70% of all private jet flights globally. The number of routes, aircraft, and operators is staggering. This creates a massively complex marketplace, and complexity is where brokers thrive. They are the navigators, the human guides through a sea of options. For anyone looking to understand a true modern American success story, this is it. It's a story about identifying a gap, leveraging technology, and providing immense value to a clientele that is willing to pay for perfection. It's a world where a single relationship can be worth millions, and your reputation is the only currency that truly matters. So the question is, how does it all begin? How does a brand new broker, with no connections and no experience in aviation, land that very first client? How do they convince a billionaire to trust them with a $50,000 transaction when they have zero track record? Seems impossible, but there is a playbook. There are specific strategies, channels, and tactics that the most successful new brokers are using right now to break into this exclusive world. And that is exactly where we're going next. The playbook isn't what you think. It's not a dusty leather-bound book of contacts passed down through generations. It's not about having a famous last name or a membership at the most exclusive country club. For the new wave of brokers, the playbook is digital, it's surgical, and it's built on a foundation of something the old guard often took for granted: manufactured trust. Think about it. The single biggest hurdle for any new broker is credibility. An ultra-high net worth individual, a CEO, a celebrity's manager, they are not going to entrust a $200,000 flight for their principal to a stranger they found on Google. Their primary concern isn't just price. It's safety, reliability, and discretion. They are buying peace of mind. So how does a brand new broker with zero flights under their belt sell peace of mind? They start by building a fortress of credibility before a single conversation ever takes place. This is the first and most crucial chapter of the playbook: the digital handshake. The old-school handshake deal in a private lounge has been replaced by a meticulous, perfectly curated online presence that screams competence and stability. This isn't just about having a website. It's about having a website that doesn't look like it was built by a broker. It needs to look like it was built by a private bank or a luxury concierge service. The language is precise. The photography is professional. Not stock photos of generic jets, but high-resolution, artfully shot images that evoke a feeling of serenity and control. The About Us page doesn't talk about offering the best prices. It talks about a commitment to safety, unparalleled service, and discretion as our guiding principle. It features a professional headshot of the founder, not a selfie, but a portrait that conveys confidence and authority. Then there's LinkedIn. For the modern broker, LinkedIn is not a resume. It's a digital embassy. The successful new broker's profile is optimized to the hilt. It's not just a list of past jobs. It's a carefully crafted narrative that positions them as an aviation advisor. They share articles not about cheap empty legs, but about FAA regulatory changes, advancements in avionics, or comparisons of cabin comfort on long-haul flights. They are building a personal brand as an expert, a trusted source of information in a complex industry. The digital handshake is about making a powerful first impression, silently and at scale, so that when a potential client does discover them, the immediate subconscious reaction is, this person is legitimate. This company is real. But a great website and a polished profile are just an empty, beautiful storefront. You still need customers to walk in. This brings us to the second, and perhaps most counterintuitive, chapter of the playbook: niche supremacy. The biggest mistake new brokers make is trying to be everything to everyone. They put up a website and say, we can fly anyone, anywhere, anytime. That's a recipe for getting lost in a sea of 1,000 other brokers saying the exact same thing. The breakout stars do the opposite. They don't try to boil the ocean, they find their own private lake. They pick a niche, a tiny, specific, underserved corner of the market, and they dominate it. What does this look like in practice? It means becoming the undisputed go-to broker for a very particular type of client. For example, instead of just being a private jet broker, they become the broker for touring musicians. They learn the insane logistics of moving a band, their crew, and their equipment across 10 cities in 12 days. They understand the need for late-night departures, tarmac access for security, and catering that meets complex dietary riders. They speak the language of tour managers, or they become the expert in transporting pets. This is a huge, emotionally charged niche. They don't just book a jet. They understand which aircraft have pressurized and temperature-controlled cargo holds. They know the specific paperwork required for international animal transport, and they partner with FBOs that are pet-friendly. They market themselves not as a jet service, but as a 5-star travel solution for your 4-legged family members. We see this everywhere. Brokers who specialize in medical transport, understanding the intricacies of flying with medical teams and sensitive equipment. Brokers who focus exclusively on corporate roadshows for tech IPOs, mastering the art of multi-leg, same-day trips for investment bankers. Brokers who build their entire business around flying clients to major sporting events like the Super Bowl or the Masters. By niching down, they achieve 3 critical things. First, their marketing becomes laser-focused and infinitely more effective. Instead of shouting into the void of the internet, they can target their message directly to tour managers, veterinarian associations, or venture capital firms. Second, they build genuine expertise that differentiates them from generalists. When a potential client with a specific, complex need finds them, the choice is obvious. Why call a general broker when you can call the specialist? And third, it accelerates word of mouth. In these tight-knit communities, a broker who does a phenomenal job for one client is immediately recommended to others. They become the industry's known secret. So now they have the fortress of credibility and a specific target. But how do they plant their flag and announce their presence? This leads to the third chapter of the playbook, the engine that drives the entire strategy. Content as a trust catalyst. The new broker doesn't cold call. They attract. They create and distribute incredibly valuable, niche-specific content that answers their ideal clients' most pressing questions, positioning themselves as an educator and an advocate, not a salesperson. The broker specializing in music tours doesn't run ads that say, book your tour jet here. Instead, they write a detailed blog post titled, The 5 Biggest Logistical Mistakes Tour Managers Make When Chartering Aircraft. They create a downloadable PDF checklist, the ultimate pre-flight checklist for transporting musical equipment. They might even host a short webinar with a veteran tour manager about how to save 20% on your tour's air travel budget. The pet travel expert creates a video series on YouTube comparing the pet facilities at different private airports in the New York area. They write an article on understanding USDA regulations for flying your dog to Europe. They build an online calculator that helps owners estimate the total cost of flying with their specific breed of animal. This isn't content for the sake of content. It's a strategic tool designed to build trust before the first email is ever sent. It demonstrates expertise in a way that a sales pitch never could. It filters out the tire kickers and attracts serious, qualified leads who are already pre-sold on the broker's knowledge and authority. When that tour manager, after reading 3 incredibly helpful articles, finally picks up the phone, the conversation isn't, "Who are you and why should I trust you?" It's, "I've been following your work. You clearly know what you're doing. I have a tour I need help with." The digital handshake establishes legitimacy. Niche supremacy creates a target. And content is the magnet that pulls that target in. This 3-part foundation is how brokers are being built from scratch today, without a single connection in the industry. It's a systematic approach to manufacturing the one thing that money can't buy, a reputation. But this sophisticated machine creates a new, more complex problem. You can have the best website, the perfect niche, and the most valuable content in the world, but if no one sees it, it's all for nothing. How do you get this content in front of people who manage billions of dollars? How do you penetrate the firewalls of family offices and the inner circles of the ultra-wealthy? You can't just rely on them stumbling upon your blog. There is a very specific and often expensive set of strategies for targeted distribution. And that is the next crucial piece of the puzzle. So let's get one thing straight. The idea that a new private jet broker just puts up a sleek website, runs a few targeted Facebook ads showing a Gulfstream G650, and waits for the CEO of a Fortune 500 company to fill out a Contact Us form is a complete fantasy. That's not how this world works. The ultra-high net worth individuals, the people who are actually stroking the checks for these $50,000 flights, are surrounded by a fortress of gatekeepers. Executive assistants, chiefs of staff, family office managers. Their entire world is structured to filter out the noise. And a new broker is, by definition, noise. To break through, you can't attack the fortress head-on. You have to find the side doors. You have to find the trusted advisors who already have the king's ear. This is the first and arguably most important secret of client acquisition in private aviation. You don't sell to the principal, you sell to the principal's ecosystem. Think about it. Who is the person most likely tasked with the logistical nightmare of moving a billionaire, their family, their executives, and their entourage around the globe? It's not the billionaire themselves. It's their executive assistant, their estate manager, or a director at their family office. These are the people who feel the pain. They are the ones dealing with last-minute schedule changes, impossible requests, and the fallout when a commercial flight gets delayed. They are the true customer. A smart new broker understands this. They spend zero time trying to get a billionaire's direct email. Instead, they spend months building a database of every top-tier executive assistant in New York, every family office in Miami, every luxury concierge in Beverly Hills. These are the feeder industries. High-end real estate agents who just sold a $20 million penthouse. Exotic car dealers. Yacht brokers. Art consultants. Anyone who provides a high-touch, high-trust service to the wealthy is a potential partner. The strategy isn't just to call them up and ask for a referral. That's amateur hour. The real play is to provide them with value first to make their lives easier. A broker might reach out to an executive assistant and say, "I know you handle Mr. Smith's travel. I've put together a complimentary analysis of his last 6 months of flights. Based on my data, I can show you how switching from his current provider to a more dynamic marketplace model could save him over $100,000 this year, while giving you access to a wider range of aircraft. No strings attached. It's just information to make you look good." Now what have they done? They haven't sold a flight. They've sold a solution to the gatekeeper's problem. They've positioned themselves as an expert resource, not a salesperson. They've given that assistant a powerful tool to take to their boss, making the assistant look proactive and brilliant. The broker becomes a trusted ally in the background. Once you have one of these key gatekeepers on your side, you haven't just gained a potential client, you've gained a channel. That same assistant might manage travel for 3 other executives. That family office might manage the wealth of a dozen different families. One well-placed relationship can be the seed for an entire book of business. But relationships are slow. They take time to cultivate. In a business where cash flow is king, you can't always wait. And that's where the second, more aggressive strategy comes in, the data game. We live in an age of digital breadcrumbs, and the wealthy, for all their privacy, leave them too. There are specialized subscription services, costing thousands of dollars a month, that are essentially treasure maps for brokers. These aren't just lists of rich people. They are dynamic intelligence platforms. They scrape data from SEC filings, tracking when an executive cashes out a massive number of stock options, a liquidity event that means they suddenly have millions in cash ready to be spent. They monitor M&A activity, identifying founders who just sold their company for a 9-figure sum. They track high-value real estate transactions. A person who just bought a $15 million home in Aspen is a prime candidate for private flights to get there. Gets even more granular. These platforms can flag news of a new sports team owner, a major art auction purchase, or even a messy high-profile divorce settlement. Each of these life events is a trigger. It's a signal that a person's needs, lifestyle, and spending habits are about to change dramatically. The broker isn't just guessing. They are using data to pinpoint the precise moment a prospect becomes a qualified lead. The outreach then becomes incredibly specific. It's not a generic cold call. It's a carefully crafted message that might say, "Congratulations on the recent sale of your company. As you transition into your next chapter, you'll likely find your travel needs becoming more complex. I specialize in providing seamless private aviation solutions for entrepreneurs just like you." It's timely, it's relevant, and it shows that the broker has done their homework. It cuts through the noise because it speaks directly to the prospect's current situation. But even with the best relationships and the most precise data, there is a ceiling to what you can achieve remotely. The world of the ultra-wealthy is deeply physical. It's a world of handshakes, face-to-face meetings, and shared experiences. And this leads to the third, and perhaps most challenging strategy: physical infiltration. You have to go where they are. You have to breathe the same rarefied air. This doesn't mean crashing parties at the Hamptons. It's a calculated science of presence. Brokers will pay thousands of dollars for a table at the right charity gala, not because they care deeply about the cause, but because they know the 5 tables around them will be filled with their ideal clients. It's the most expensive but also the most effective form of lead generation on the planet. They become sponsors of exclusive polo matches, pro-am golf tournaments, and private wine tasting events in Napa Valley. The goal isn't to walk around handing out business cards. The goal is to become a familiar face in the background, a legitimate part of the scenery. The ultimate hunting grounds are the industry-specific events. Think of the annual NBA Aviation Conference, where everyone from NetJets executives to single aircraft owners congregates. Or Art Basel in Miami, where billionaires fly in from around the world on their jets to acquire art. A savvy broker will be there, not just to network but to observe. They'll stand near the FBO, the private jet terminal, and take note of the tail numbers of the jets landing. Each tail number is a piece of data, can be looked up to see who owns it. Is it owned by an individual? A corporation? Is it part of a fractional fleet? This is real-time, on-the-ground intelligence. They can see who is flying on what, which gives them an incredible advantage. They might see a potential client flying on an older, less efficient jet, and know they can offer a better, more cost-effective option. It's a game of immense patience and social intelligence. You might spend $10,000 on a trip to a single event and come away with only one meaningful conversation. But that one conversation with the right person can be worth millions in future revenue. It's about planting a seed. You meet the chief operating officer of a private equity firm at a cocktail reception. You don't pitch him. You talk about the art, about a recent deal his firm made that you read about, you find common ground. Then, at the very end, you might say, "I handle private aviation for a number of your peers in the finance world. If your team ever finds themselves in a jam, I'd be happy to be a resource." You get their card and the follow-up begins. You've transformed from a cold email into a warm introduction. You're no longer just a name. You're the person they met at the St. Regis. These 3 strategies, leveraging the ecosystem, mastering the data, and achieving physical presence, form the trifecta of elite broker client acquisition. It's a world away from digital marketing funnels and SEO. It's a painstaking, expensive, and often ruthless process of building trust and gaining access in a world that is designed to keep outsiders out. But once a broker masters these methods, they can begin to build a truly resilient, high-value client list. However, getting the client is only half the battle. The real test, the thing that separates the flash-in-the-pan brokers from the industry titans, is what happens after they get that first call. Because when a billionaire's assistant calls you at 2 a.m. on a Saturday needing a jet to London in 3 hours, your answer can't be "let me check." Your entire reputation, and your entire business, rests on your ability to perform magic on demand. And that magic isn't just a metaphor. It's a meticulously engineered process, a high-wire act performed without a net, where the currency is trust and the product is time. To truly understand what these brokers do, we need to step inside the eye of the hurricane. Let's pull back the curtain on a scenario that happens, in some form or another, every single night in America. Imagine it's 1:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in New York City. A broker, let's call him David, is asleep. His phone, a dedicated line that never goes on silent, buzzes on his nightstand. It's not a text, it's a call. He's instantly awake, his mind already racing. On the other end is the executive assistant for a titan of private equity. The voice is calm, but the undertone is pure adrenaline. The CEO, Mr. Thompson, was supposed to be in a crucial M&A meeting in Chicago at 9 a.m., but the deal accelerated. The other side is trying to pull a fast one. The meeting has been moved up, not to 9 a.m., to 7 a.m. in Dallas. That's 5 hours from now. And Mr. Thompson is currently at his apartment on the Upper East Side. Every commercial flight is a non-starter. Even if he could get to an airport and through security, there isn't a flight that gets him there in time. The entire multi-billion-dollar acquisition, the culmination of 6 months of work, hinges on him walking into that Dallas boardroom in 5 hours. This is what we call a no-fail mission. The assistant doesn't ask, "Is it possible?" She says, "We need a jet. Wheels up in 90 minutes. Teterboro. Get him to Dallas Love Field. He needs secure, high-speed Wi-Fi on board to prep with his legal team. And he only drinks a specific type of Fijian bottled water. Make it happen." And then she hangs up. For David, the broker, the world shrinks to the screen of his laptop. He's not just looking for a plane. He's orchestrating a symphony of logistics against an impossible deadline. The first thing he does is log into his system. This isn't Kayak or Expedia. This is a live, dynamic marketplace of thousands of private aircraft. Think of it like the stock market's trading floor, but for Gulfstreams and citations. It shows him every available Part 135 certified aircraft in the northeastern United States, their current location, their maintenance status, and even the crew's duty time. He filters for jets that meet the criteria. It needs the range to get to Dallas without a fuel stop. It needs that specific top-tier Wi-Fi system. Not all private jets have it. And most importantly, it needs to be based at or very near Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, with a crew that's on call, and can be at the plane in under an hour. Within 60 seconds, the system gives him 3 options. A Learjet 60, a Citation XL, and a Hawker 800 XP. The Learjet is fastest, but its Wi-Fi is spotty. The Citation is reliable, but it's currently parked at the far end of the airfield, and getting it fueled and ready might take too long. The Hawker is the sweet spot. Good speed, great cabin, excellent connectivity, and it's hangared close to the FBO, the private terminal. David doesn't email. He calls the operator's 24-hour dispatch line directly. This is where relationships are critical. He doesn't just know the company. He knows the dispatcher, a guy named Mike, personally. He's sent Mike's company dozens of flights. That relationship equity is about to be cashed in. "Mike, it's David. I have an emergency. I need your Hawker 800 X-ray Papa at Teterboro. Need wheels up in 75 minutes for Dallas Love." The principal is en route. There's a pause. Mike is checking his crew schedule. "Pilots are on rest, David, but they're local. I can get them there. It's going to be tight, and it's going to cost." This is the next piece of the puzzle, the price. A last-minute charter like this isn't cheap. The price isn't just for the flight. It's for the instant activation of the crew, the cost of opening the FBO after hours, the fuel, the landing fees. And because the jet will end up in Dallas, it will likely have to fly back to its home base in New Jersey empty. The client has to pay for that empty return leg. This is called a positioning fee, and it can nearly double the cost of the trip. David gets the all-in price from Mike. He adds his own fee, the broker's commission, and instantly drafts a charter agreement. He fires it off to the assistant. The entire process from the initial call to the contract being sent has taken less than 8 minutes. While he waits for the signature, he's already moving on to the next steps. He calls the FBO at Teterboro. "Hi, it's David. I have a Hawker 800 XP departing in about an hour. I need a black car on the ramp to meet the passenger, and I need you to pull a favor. Find me a case of Fiji water. I don't care if you have to send someone to a 24-hour convenience store. It has to be on that plane." Then, he arranges the ground transportation in Dallas. A pre-vetted car service will be waiting on the tarmac at Love Field the moment the jet's door opens, ready to whisk Mr. Thompson straight to his meeting. He confirms every detail, down to the driver's name and cell number. The signed contract comes back. It's 2:15 a.m. The pilots are racing to the airport. The fuel truck is rolling towards the hawker. The FBO manager is raiding a vending machine for water. Everything is in motion. And then a problem. A big one. The co-pilot driving to the airport gets a flat tire on the highway. He's stuck. He won't make it in time. The entire mission is about to collapse. The operator, Mike, calls David with the bad news. An average person would panic. An average broker might have to call the client and admit defeat. But David isn't an average broker. He doesn't miss a beat. He tells Mike to keep the captain at the airport. Then he goes back to his system. No more planes at Teterboro. He widens his search. Westchester County Airport. Morristown. There. A Challenger 300, a bigger, better jet, based in Morristown, about a 45-minute drive from Teterboro. He calls the new operator. It's a company he's worked with before. He explains the situation. This is a poach. He's taking a flight from one operator and giving it to another, which can be a dangerous game. But this is an emergency. He negotiates a new price. The Challenger is more expensive, but he knows the client won't care. Failure is more expensive. He confirms the Challenger. Now he has to reroute the entire mission. He calls the executive assistant. He doesn't say there's a problem. He doesn't mention a flat tire. That's his chaos to manage, not hers. He frames it as an upgrade. Quick update, he says with complete confidence. We've had to make a slight adjustment. We've put Mr. Thompson on a larger, faster aircraft, a Challenger 300. The only change is that it's departing from Morristown Airport. My driver is already rerouted to his location, and will take him there directly. All other arrangements in Dallas are confirmed. The assistant just says, "Thank you." She doesn't need the details. She just needs the result. David then has to cancel the hawker, apologizing profusely to Mike but promising to make it up to him with future business. He coordinates with the driver to ensure the passenger, Mr. Thompson, is taken to the correct airport, the correct FBO, the correct tail number. He confirms the Fiji water is now on board the Challenger. At 3:30 a.m. Mr. Thompson, who has no idea of the frantic behind-the-scenes ballet of failure and recovery that just occurred, boards his upgraded jet in Morristown. He opens his laptop, connects to the Wi-Fi and begins prepping with his team. The jet soars into the night sky. He lands in Dallas with 20 minutes to spare. The car is waiting. He walks into the boardroom, completely prepared, and secures the deal. David, the broker, finally gets an email at 9 a.m. It's from the assistant. All it says is, "Incredible. Thank you." That's it. No parade, no medal. Just a quiet confirmation that the magic trick worked. He didn't just sell a flight. He sold a solution. He sold time. He sold the continuation of a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. He was the invisible hand that guided the asset from point A to point B, overcoming every obstacle without the client ever feeling a single bump in the road. This is the anatomy of a private jet charter. It's a world where resourcefulness, relationships, and an absolute refusal to fail are the minimum requirements for entry. And it's this unique skill set, this ability to conduct chaos into a symphony of seamless execution, that has fueled the meteoric rise of the charter broker in the high-stakes world of American business. But what exactly does that symphony sound like in terms of dollars and cents? How does a profession built on phone calls, quick thinking, and an encyclopedic knowledge of aircraft turn into a multi-billion-dollar industry? The answer lies not just in the skill of the individual broker, but in the seismic economic shifts that were rumbling across the American landscape at the turn of the millennium. The dot-com boom wasn't just creating new companies, it was creating a new kind of client. This wasn't the old money of Wall Street or the inherited wealth of industrial dynasties, who often owned their own aircraft or had long-standing relationships with legacy operators. This was new money, fast money. It was the 28-year-old CEO who had just taken his software company public. It was the venture capitalist in Silicon Valley who needed to be in New York for a board meeting tomorrow morning and back in Palo Alto for a dinner that same night. These clients didn't have a flight department. They didn't have time to research Federal Aviation Administration Part 135 regulations. What they had was a problem that needed a solution, and they had the capital to pay for the fastest, most efficient solution possible. They didn't care about the tail number. They cared about the time saved. They didn't want to own the asset. They wanted access to the service. Into this void stepped the charter broker. They were the perfect intermediaries for this new Gilded Age. They spoke the language of speed, efficiency, and discretion. And they operated on a business model that was as agile and scalable as the tech companies they were serving. At its core, the broker's model is deceptively simple. They don't own the planes. They don't employ the pilots. They don't pay for the fuel, the maintenance, or the hangar space. They are, in essence, information and access merchants. Their primary asset is their network and their knowledge of the market. They make their money in the spread, the difference between the wholesale price they negotiate with the aircraft operator and the retail price the client pays. Let's break that down. An aircraft operator, the company that actually owns and flies the jet, has massive fixed costs. The hangar, the insurance, the pilot salaries, the scheduled maintenance, they have to pay all of it whether the plane is flying or sitting on the ground. A grounded jet isn't just an asset. It's a liability, burning cash every single minute. So that operator has a wholesale price, a number they need to hit just to cover their costs and make a small profit on a given flight. They might tell a network of trusted brokers, I need to get my jet from Miami to New York tomorrow. I can do it for $20,000. The broker then goes to their client, the tech CEO, who needs that exact trip. The broker knows the market. They know what a jet of that size and quality typically costs for that route. They know what their client's time is worth. They quote the client a price of, say, $25,000. When the client agrees, the broker confirms the flight with the operator. They've just created $5,000 in value seemingly out of thin air. They didn't buy a plane. They didn't hire a pilot. They connected a need with a solution and captured the value of that connection. This is the fundamental engine of the brokerage industry. Now, how that spread is structured can vary. In the early days, it was often a straight commission model similar to a real estate agent. The broker would take a percentage, say 10% of the total charter cost. This was simple, but it created a potential conflict of interest. A broker might be incentivized to push a client towards a more expensive, larger aircraft than they actually needed, simply to increase their own commission. As the industry matured and clients became more sophisticated, a more transparent model began to take hold, the fixed markup or net pricing model. Here, the broker would secure the wholesale price from the operator and then add a pre-agreed-upon fixed fee or a smaller percentage. They might say to the client, the wholesale cost for this flight is $20,000. Our management fee is $3,000. Your all-in price is $23,000. This built trust. The client knew exactly what the broker was making, and the broker's incentive was aligned with the client's to find the best possible aircraft at the best possible wholesale price, regardless of the final sticker price. This simple economic model was the spark, but the true explosion in the industry came from a revolutionary financial product, the jet card. The jet card was pure genius. It transformed the unpredictable transactional nature of on-demand charter into a stable, predictable, and incredibly lucrative recurring revenue stream. The concept was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of booking one flight at a time, a client could pre-purchase flight time in bulk, typically in 25-hour increments. They would buy a 25-hour card for a light jet, a mid-size jet, or a heavy jet. This did several things at once. First, it solved a major pain point for the client. They no longer had to get quotes and sign contracts for every single trip. They had a locked-in hourly rate. They had guaranteed availability, often with as little as 10 hours notice. It was like having a private jet on retainer. It turned a complex procurement process into something as simple as using a debit card. Second, and more importantly for the brokers, it was a cash flow game changer. A brokerage company could sell a 25-hour card on a mid-sized jet for, let's say, $200,000. They received that $200,000 upfront in cash. That is a massive interest-free loan from the client. The brokerage now has a huge pool of capital, often called float, that they can use to operate and grow their business, all before providing a single hour of flight service. They could use that float to hire more brokers, invest in marketing, or develop new technology. The jet card created loyalty. A client with hours on a card was no longer a free agent in the market. They were a captive customer. And it allowed brokerages to scale in a way that was previously unimaginable. A single broker can only handle so many on-demand trips at once, but a company could sell thousands of jet cards, creating a vast pool of predictable flight demand and an even vaster pool of upfront cash. The largest players in the industry today are not just aviation companies. They are sophisticated financial institutions built on the bedrock of the jet card model. Of course, this gold rush had a dark side. In the early 2000s, the charter brokerage world was the Wild West. There was virtually no regulation. Anyone with a phone and a website could call themselves a private jet broker. There were no licensing requirements, no bonding, no mandatory certifications. This low barrier to entry attracted not just brilliant entrepreneurs, but also unscrupulous opportunists. Horror stories began to circulate. A company would sell a handful of jet cards, collecting hundreds of thousands of dollars in upfront cash, only for the broker to vanish, leaving clients with worthless cards and no way to get their money back. Or a broker would take a client's payment for a specific flight, then book a much cheaper, older, and less safe aircraft from a questionable operator, pocketing the enormous difference. They were playing on the client's lack of industry knowledge, a dangerous game when you're dealing with aviation. This lack of oversight created a climate of distrust that threatened to suffocate the young industry in its cradle. The legitimate, professional brokers who were building real businesses based on safety, service, and transparency found themselves competing against fly-by-night operators who were giving the entire profession a bad name. It became clear that for the industry to survive and thrive, it couldn't just be about making money. It had to be about building trust. It had to professionalize. The chaos of the gold rush had to be forged into the steel of a legitimate, reliable industry. This struggle for legitimacy would define the next chapter of the broker's story, pitting the pioneers against the pirates in a battle for the soul of private aviation. And in this battle, the pirates had a devastating early advantage. They operated in the shadows, armed with nothing more than a rented desk, a telephone, and a complete disregard for ethics or safety. Their tactics were crude but effective. A client would call, desperate for a last-minute flight from New York to Miami. The pirate broker, let's call him Sunrise Charters, would quote an unbelievably low price, a price that undercut every legitimate competitor. The client, thrilled with the deal, would wire the money, and then silence. The phone number would be disconnected. The money and Sunrise Charters would vanish. This was the classic deposit scam, and it happened with sickening regularity. But the real danger, the truly terrifying risk, wasn't just about losing money. It was about losing your life. The more insidious pirates wouldn't just disappear. They'd actually book a plane. The problem was what plane they booked. To make their razor-thin margins work after quoting a suicidal price, they had to cut corners. And the first corner to get cut was always safety. They would find the absolute cheapest operator in the system, an operator who was cheap for a reason. Maybe their pilots weren't getting enough rest. Maybe a critical maintenance check was pencil-whipped instead of actually performed. Maybe the plane itself was a flying relic that should have been retired a decade ago. The client would have no idea. They'd see a jet, it looked like a jet, and they'd get on. They were putting their trust and their families' lives in the hands of a broker whose only qualification was a slick sales pitch. This was the existential threat. Every time a pirate broker put a client on an unsafe aircraft, they weren't just risking lives. They were poisoning the well for the entire industry. The legitimate brokers, the pioneers who were painstakingly building relationships and reputations, watched in horror. They knew that a single high-profile accident traced back to a shady broker could collapse the whole house of cards. Public perception doesn't do nuance. A headline wouldn't read, "Unregulated broker cuts corners." It would read, "Private jet charter crash." The entire concept of using a middleman would be tainted. So they had to fight back. They had to draw a line in the sand. This wasn't a gentleman's agreement over cocktails at a convention. This was a war for survival. The first weapon they forged was organization. Groups like the National Business Aviation Association, or NBAA, began to develop best practice guidelines. Legitimate brokers started forming their own coalitions, creating codes of conduct. It was a promise, a pledge to their clients. When you work with us, you are working with a professional. We don't just find you a plane. We guarantee a standard. They began to self-police, sharing information about rogue operators and blacklisting brokers who engaged in unethical practices. It was the industry's immune system finally kicking in, identifying the cancerous cells and trying to isolate them. But a code of conduct is only as strong as the people who agree to it. It's a handshake deal in a world that needed an ironclad contract. They needed an independent, unimpeachable third party, a referee. And in the 1990s, two of them walked onto the field and changed the game forever: Argus and Wyvern. These weren't government agencies. They were private companies born from a critical need for objective, data-driven safety intelligence. Think of them as the credit rating agencies for aviation. Before them, A client's only real measure of an operator's safety was the operator's own word. "Of course we're safe," they'd say. After Argus and Wyvern, there was a number. There was a grade. There was proof. Argus, which stands for the Aviation Research Group United States, created a tiered rating system that became the industry benchmark. An operator could be Gold, Gold Plus, or the Holy Grail Platinum. To get an Argus Platinum rating, an operator had to undergo a grueling on-site audit. Auditors would descend on their facilities, poring over maintenance logs, pilot training records, emergency procedures, and the very culture of the company. They would look at everything. How many hours has this specific pilot flown in this specific aircraft type? What is the company's policy on pilot fatigue? Has there ever been an FAA enforcement action against them? It was an exhaustive, top-to-bottom examination. If an operator earned a platinum rating, it was a signal to the world that their safety standards didn't just meet the FAA's minimum requirements, they far exceeded them. Wyvern, a company founded by a former F-15 fighter pilot, took a similar approach with its own highly respected standard, the Wyvern Wingman certification. Their auditors, also aviation veterans, would conduct their own rigorous audits. A Wyvern Wingman operator wasn't just safe on paper, they had proven it under intense scrutiny. Suddenly, the legitimate brokers had the ultimate weapon against the pirates. A client calls, gets a lowball quote from a shady broker. They then call a professional, who quotes a higher, more realistic price. The client says, "Why are you so much more expensive?" The professional broker could now say, "That's a fair question. Let me ask you this. Is the operator they quoted you Argus Platinum? Are they a Wyvern Wingman? Can they provide you with a trip-specific safety report called a trip CHEQ or a pass report that verifies the plane, the pilots, and the trip are all cleared for flight today?" The pirate broker couldn't answer those questions. Their entire business model was built on finding the one operator in the country who couldn't pass those audits. The conversation changed overnight. It was no longer just about price. It was about verified, quantifiable safety. It was the difference between buying a car from a reputable dealership with a full vehicle history report and buying one from a guy in a back alley with a hand-painted for sale sign. This new ecosystem of trust began to starve the pirates of their oxygen. Clients were becoming more educated. They started asking the right questions. The rise of the internet accelerated this. Information that was once hidden away in FAA databases or industry journals was now becoming searchable. You could look up an aircraft's tail number. You could read reviews. Transparency was the sunlight that disinfected the darkest corners of the industry. The legitimate brokers embraced this. They built their businesses on this foundation of transparency and safety. Their value proposition was no longer just access and convenience. It was peace of mind. They weren't just booking flights. They were acting as their client's advocate, their outsourced flight department, their expert consultant whose primary job was to manage risk. They would tell a client, "No, you can't take that particular jet. The audit is out of date." Or, "We need to switch pilots. The co-pilot doesn't have enough recent experience in mountain airports." They were the ones doing the homework, making the tough calls, and absorbing the complexity so the client could have a simple, safe experience. By the turn of the millennium, the war for legitimacy seemed to be won. The pirates were in retreat, and the pioneers had successfully established a professional industry with standards, ethics, and a robust system of third-party safety verification. They had built a fortress, with walls of Argus Platinum ratings and moats of Wyvern Wingman certifications. The charter broker was no longer a shadowy figure in a boiler room, but a respected aviation professional. They had survived their chaotic adolescence and entered a new era of stability and growth. But as they celebrated their victory, they were completely unaware of a new disruptive force gathering on the horizon. It wasn't a pirate trying to breach the walls. It was a technological tidal wave born in Silicon Valley that was about to wash over their entire world and change the definition of what it meant to book a private jet forever. The year was 2011. The world was high on the promise of the app. With a tap on a glass screen, you could summon a car, rent a stranger's apartment, or have groceries delivered to your door. In the boardrooms of Palo Alto and the coffee shops of San Francisco, a new gospel was being preached: disruption. The core belief was simple and ruthless. Find an old-world industry, one built on relationships, gatekeepers, and opaque pricing, and break it. Decapitate the middleman with a digital guillotine, and connect the consumer directly to the source. It was a revolution fueled by venture capital and the intoxicating idea that technology could solve any inefficiency. And as these new titans of tech looked around for their next target, their eyes fell upon the shimmering, exclusive world of private aviation. To them, it looked like the perfect victim. It was an industry that still ran on phone calls, handshakes, and personal address books. The brokers, with their guarded knowledge and hefty commissions, looked like relics. They were the taxi dispatchers of the sky, the travel agents of the 1%. The tech founders saw a system begging to be streamlined, automated, and democratized, at least for those who could afford it. The pitch was seductive, almost hypnotic in its simplicity. Why call a broker, wait for them to call operators, get a few quotes back hours later, and then negotiate? Why not build a marketplace? An Expedia for private jets, an Uber for the sky, an app where you could enter your departure city, your destination, and the number of passengers and instantly see every available jet in the country, ranked by price with photos and specs. You could book a $10,000 flight with the same ease as ordering a pizza. No gatekeepers, no friction, just pure unadulterated access. And so they came. A flood of new companies with sleek names and even sleeker user interfaces. JetSmarter, Victor, PrivateFly. They raised hundreds of millions of dollars. Their marketing was brilliant. They sold a lifestyle, not just a flight. They sponsored glamorous events, partnered with luxury brands, and filled Instagram feeds with images of beautiful people clinking champagne glasses on the steps of a Gulf Stream. Their message was clear. This exclusive club? We're throwing the doors wide open. The old way is dead. The future is on your phone. For a new generation of wealth, the tech entrepreneurs, the crypto millionaires, the startup founders who had just cashed out, this was the only way that made sense. They didn't have a 30-year relationship with a broker in Teterboro. They had a smartphone and an expectation of instant gratification. They saw the traditional brokers as dinosaurs, clinging to their Rolodexes and outdated practices. The idea of paying a premium for a broker's expertise seemed absurd when an algorithm could theoretically do it better, faster, and cheaper. The old guard, the established brokers who had built their careers on trust and meticulous service, were horrified. They looked at these new tech platforms and saw not innovation, but a reckless disregard for the complexities of their industry. To them, these were kids in hoodies who thought an airplane was just a data point in a server. They didn't understand the nuance of crew duty times, the critical importance of an operator's safety rating, or what it takes to divert a flight around a thunderstorm at 2 in the morning. They saw the promise of instant booking as a dangerous fantasy. Aviation, especially at this level, wasn't a commodity. It was a high-stakes, life-or-death logistics puzzle. The clash was epic. It was the old world versus the new, the art of the relationship versus the science of the algorithm. The seasoned broker, who knew the chief pilot at a charter company by his first name, was now competing against a faceless app that promised the world for 10% less. And for a while it looked like the dinosaurs were doomed. Customers flocked to the new platforms, lured by the siren song of lower prices and digital convenience. The tech companies were celebrated in the press as innovators, the ones who were finally cracking the code of this secretive industry. But then the cracks started to show. The beautiful, seamless interface began to reveal the messy, complicated reality it was trying to hide. The first major problem was something the industry came to call phantom inventory. To look as comprehensive as possible, these new platforms would list thousands of aircraft they didn't actually have a direct relationship with. They would scrape data from public sources, creating a massive but ultimately fake marketplace. A client, a tech CEO needing to get to a vital meeting in Omaha, would open the app. He'd see a beautiful Learjet 60, listed at an incredible price, available in 2 hours. He'd tap Book Now, enter his credit card details, and feel the thrill of on-demand power. But then 10 minutes later he'd get an email. Or worse, a call from a low-level sales representative in a call center. We're sorry, that specific aircraft is no longer available, but we can get you a similar jet for $3,000 more. It was a classic bait and switch. The app wasn't a booking engine. It was a lead generation tool. The instant quote was an illusion, a ghost, designed to capture the customer's interest before handing them off to a human, who would then have to do the actual work of finding a plane, the very thing the app was supposed to eliminate. The second and far more serious issue was safety. The traditional broker's most important job, their sacred duty, was vetting the operator. They checked the Argus and Wyvern safety ratings. They knew the operator's history, their maintenance standards, the experience level of their crews. Their reputation and their client's life depended on it. The algorithm, however, was programmed to prioritize price. The platform would often present the cheapest option as the best option, without a clear, bold warning that the operator might have a less than stellar safety record or was using older, less reliable aircraft. The user, assuming the app had done the vetting, would book the flight, completely unaware of the potential risk. They were trading the unseen expertise of a seasoned professional for a slick user interface and a slightly lower price. And finally, there was the problem of service. The private jet client isn't just buying a seat, they're buying a seamless experience. They expect perfection. What happens when the jet has a mechanical issue an hour before takeoff? What happens when the client's meeting runs 3 hours late? What happens when a freak snowstorm closes the destination airport? A good broker is a master problem solver, a 24/7 concierge who makes these issues disappear. They have backup aircraft on speed dial. They can arrange ground transportation in a new city with a single phone call. They can get a flight plan changed in minutes. The app couldn't do that. When things went wrong, clients were often left dealing with a customer service email address or a call center employee who had no power to fix their multi-million-dollar problem. The technology that was so brilliant at handling the simple, perfect world scenario utterly collapsed in the face of real-world chaos. The promise of friction-free travel became a nightmare of digital dead ends. Slowly, the market began to learn a painful lesson. The Uber for Jets model in its purest form was a flawed concept. It had tried to remove the human element from an industry that fundamentally required it. It turned out the middleman, the broker, wasn't just a gatekeeper. They were a safety net, a quality controller, a crisis manager. That commission wasn't just for making a phone call. It was for the expertise, the relationships, and the peace of mind that when you're flying at 40,000 feet, someone on the ground has your back. The tech companies, bleeding cash and facing frustrated customers, began to realize their mistake. The dinosaurs they had tried to render extinct held a crucial piece of the puzzle, and the old guard brokers, watching from the sidelines, realized that the technological tidal wave wasn't going to recede. The customer's expectation for speed and transparency had been permanently changed. Neither side could win alone. The industry was standing at a crossroads, forced to evolve or die. What rose from the ashes of this initial brutal conflict was something new entirely. A hybrid model that would take the best of both worlds and redefine the role of the private jet broker for the modern age. This new hybrid broker wasn't just a traditional brokerage with a website, nor was it a cold, faceless app. It was a sophisticated fusion, a centaur of the industry, the raw power and speed of technology fused with the intelligence and nuanced judgment of a human expert. The core idea was simple, yet revolutionary. Use technology to handle everything it's good at, and use humans for everything they are irreplaceable for. So, what did that look like in practice? On the front end, the client experience was transformed. Instead of a series of phone calls and emails, a customer could now open an app or a web portal. They could enter their desired trip, New York to Miami, 6 passengers, next Tuesday. Instantly, the platform's algorithm would scour a massive, real-time database of available aircraft from hundreds of different operators. It would cross-reference safety ratings, aircraft age, amenities, and operator reviews, presenting a curated list of options and price points in seconds. This was the speed and transparency that the tech disruptors had promised. It was clean, efficient, and it put an immense amount of power directly into the client's hands. But here's where the hybrid model revealed its true genius. The moment you showed interest in a quote, or if your request was slightly more complex, say, a multi-leg international trip with a pet on board and a specific type of catering, you weren't left alone with the algorithm. A notification would ping on the screen of a dedicated aviation advisor, a highly trained human broker. This was your single point of contact. This person wasn't just a salesperson. They were a logistics expert, a problem solver, and a concierge. They would review the algorithm's suggestions, perhaps notice that while aircraft A is cheaper, aircraft B has a better track record on that specific route, and its operator is known for exceptional service. They would call the client not to sell but to advise. I see you're looking at the Citation X, they might say. It's a fantastic fast aircraft. But for a flight of this length with 6 passengers, you might be more comfortable in the Challenger 300. It's a little more, but the cabin is significantly larger, and I can probably get the operator to include the catering at no extra cost. This was the magic formula. The technology did the heavy lifting, the number crunching, the market scanning. The human provided the wisdom, the context, and the personal touch. It solved the fundamental problem that had plagued both sides of the initial conflict. The old-school brokers were too slow and opaque. The pure tech platforms were too rigid and impersonal, utterly failing when faced with the messy, unpredictable reality of aviation. This new synthesis gave rise to the titans of the modern charter industry. Companies like Wheels Up, founded by Kenny Dichter, didn't just build a better brokerage, they built an entire ecosystem. Dichter, a marketing visionary, understood that the product wasn't just the flight, it was the lifestyle and the sense of belonging. Wheels Up pioneered a membership model that sat somewhere between on-demand charter and fractional ownership. Members paid an initiation fee and annual dues, and in return, they got access to a dedicated fleet of aircraft, capped hourly rates, and a host of exclusive perks, from Super Bowl parties to celebrity meet and greets. It was NetJets for a new generation. More accessible, more flexible, and brilliantly marketed. Simultaneously, companies like XO, which grew out of the operator Zojet, took a similar tech-forward approach but focused heavily on democratizing access through seat-sharing and crowdsourcing flights. Their app allowed you to not only book a whole plane but also to buy a single seat on an existing private flight or propose a new flight and let others join to split the cost. This was the closest the industry had ever come to a true Uber of the skies, but it was still underpinned by a massive 24/7 team of human advisors managing the immense complexity behind the scenes. And that complexity is the key to understanding why private aviation can never truly be like Uber or Airbnb. The Uber for private jets metaphor, while catchy, is fundamentally flawed because it ignores the near-infinite number of critical variables that a simple algorithm can't handle. Booking a car is a two-dimensional problem. Where are you and where are you going? Booking a private jet is a five-dimensional chess game. First, there's the aircraft itself. It's not just a machine. It's a multi-million-dollar asset with a life of its own. Is it currently in position for your flight, or is it halfway across the country, requiring a costly and time-consuming repositioning flight? Has it just come out of a maintenance check? Is its insurance valid for the specific country you want to fly to? Then there are the pilots. The flight crew is governed by strict FAA regulations on duty time and required rest. A pilot can't just accept another trip because the app says so. If they're nearing their time limit, they are legally grounded. A human broker knows the crew's schedule and can anticipate these issues, finding a fresh crew or a different aircraft before it ever becomes a problem for the client. Next, you have the airports. Not all airports are created equal. Can your chosen jet land on a short runway in Aspen? Does the airport you want to use at midnight even have custom services available? Is there a diplomatic event happening nearby that has restricted all air traffic? These are questions an app struggles to answer in real time. And finally, there's the passenger. The most important and most unpredictable variable of all. The client's needs are bespoke. One client needs to transport a priceless piece of art that requires specific temperature controls. Another is flying with an elderly parent who requires a medical professional on board. A third decides at the last minute to add 3 more passengers and a dog. These are not drop-down menu options. These are complex problems that require creative, human-centered solutions. A great broker doesn't just book a flight, they orchestrate an experience. They arrange the ground transportation to be waiting on the tarmac. They ensure the client's favorite brand of tequila is stocked on board. And they have a plan B, C, and D ready to go when a sudden thunderstorm closes the destination airport. The hybrid model thrived because it acknowledged this complexity. The companies that succeeded were those that used technology not to replace human experts, but to empower them, to give them superpowers. The data collected by their platforms allowed them to become smarter and more predictive. They could analyze flight patterns to anticipate demand, positioning aircraft in hotspots before the requests even came in. They perfected the art of selling empty legs, the return flights that aircraft have to make after dropping off a passenger. Historically, these flights were a massive cost for operators. But with a sophisticated digital marketplace, brokers could offer these empty legs at a significant discount, creating a win for the operator, who recouped some cost, and a massive win for a flexible traveler, who could experience a private flight for a fraction of the price. The entire industry was professionalizing at a blinding speed. The broker was no longer just a guy who knows a guy. They were now part of a sophisticated, data-driven, customer-centric organization. The balance of power had shifted permanently. The client now had unprecedented choice, transparency, and service. The operators had a powerful new channel to market their aircraft. And the brokers, the survivors of that brutal digital crucible, had emerged stronger, smarter, and more essential than ever. They had successfully integrated technology into their DNA, creating a robust, efficient, and resilient system. But this new system, built for speed and scale, had never been truly tested. It was born in a period of relative economic stability and growth. It had never faced a true, system-wide black swan event. It had no idea what was looming just over the horizon, a global crisis that would ground the world, and in a strange and unpredictable twist, send the demand for private aviation into the stratosphere, pushing this new hybrid model to its absolute breaking point. And then in March of 2020, the world went silent. For a few terrifying weeks, it seemed like the sky itself had closed for business. Private jet terminals, usually humming with discrete activity, were ghost towns. The roar of Gulf Streams was replaced by an unnerving quiet. For brokers, the phone stopped ringing. It was a silence so profound, so absolute, that many in the industry wondered if this was it. The end of the line. The great grounding. The models they had spent a decade building. The networks they had painstakingly curated. All seemed to hang in the balance, waiting for a verdict from a world gripped by fear and uncertainty. But then something strange happened. A flicker of life. It wasn't a business executive trying to make a last-minute meeting in Chicago. It was a family, desperate to get from their New York City apartment to a second home in Florida, without setting foot in a commercial airport. It was a company needing to transport essential engineers to a factory in a remote part of Texas, with every commercial flight for the next month canceled. The fear of the virus wasn't just a health crisis. It was a logistics crisis. And the very thing that made commercial air travel a modern miracle, its ability to efficiently pack hundreds of strangers into a metal tube, had suddenly become its greatest liability. The public's perception of the private jet, almost overnight, began to shift. It was no longer just a symbol of extravagance. It became a tool, a sanctuary. A private jet terminal meant interacting with perhaps a dozen people, not thousands. The aircraft cabin was a controlled environment, shared only with people you knew. You weren't at the mercy of chaotic airline schedules that were changing by the hour. You were in control. In a world that felt completely out of control, that single feeling, control, became the most valuable commodity on Earth. And so the calls started coming. First a trickle, then a steady stream, and then an absolute roaring flood. This wasn't just the billionaire class. The pandemic created an entirely new category of private flyer. It was the successful small business owner who needed to keep their company running. It was the doctor who had to get to a hospital in another state. It was families who would normally fly first class, but who now looked at the cost of 4 or 5 premium tickets, weighed it against the risk and the unreliability, and realized that chartering a light jet for their family wasn't that much more expensive. For the first time for thousands of people, the value proposition of private aviation clicked into place. They weren't buying a luxury. They were buying a solution. They were buying safety. This is where the new breed of tech-enabled brokers, the ones who had built their businesses on being asset-light and data-driven, faced their trial by fire. Their model, once a clever business strategy, became a survival mechanism. They weren't weighed down by billion-dollar fleets of aircraft sitting idle on the tarmac, bleeding cash every single day. Their entire business was a network, a complex digital web connecting operators, available aircraft, crew, and real-time data. When the floodgates of demand swung open, they were the only ones who could even attempt to manage the deluge. The slick apps and websites were now just the front door to a frantic 24/7, human-powered scramble. The phone calls were relentless. The requests were unprecedented. Can you get me a jet from LA to Aspen in 3 hours? We need a plane for 6 people, 2 dogs, and a month's worth of luggage to the Caribbean yesterday. My father is immunocompromised. We have to move him from Boston to Arizona. What can you do? The job of the broker was transformed from a sales role to that of a crisis manager, a logistics wizard, and a therapist, all rolled into one. They were sourcing aircraft that were flying constantly, dealing with crews who were exhausted, and navigating a patchwork of local travel restrictions that changed by the minute. But the system, which had been built for a steady, predictable level of demand, began to fray at the edges and then tear at the seams. For the first time in modern aviation history, it wasn't about a broker finding a customer for a plane. It was about finding a plane, any plane, for a desperate customer. The supply of available charter aircraft, which had always seemed endless, simply evaporated. Planes were booked weeks in advance. Prices, governed by the raw, brutal laws of supply and demand, went vertical. A flight that cost $20,000 in 2019 might now cost $40,000, or even $50,000, and you were lucky to get it. Then the secondary effects kicked in. The pilot shortage, which had been a slow burn issue for years, became an acute crisis. Airlines had offered early retirement packages, and thousands of experienced pilots took them. The remaining pilots were in such high demand that their salaries skyrocketed, further driving up costs. Maintenance shops were backed up for months. Getting a spare part for a jet became a logistical nightmare. Even simple things like catering became a challenge, with FBOs, the private terminals, completely overwhelmed by the volume. It was a perfect storm of overwhelming demand and a critically strained supply chain. And right in the middle of this chaos, a ticking time bomb that had been planted years earlier finally went off. The jet card programs. For years, companies had sold these cards like prepaid gift cards for the sky, promising clients locked-in, fixed hourly rates. It was a fantastic deal for the customer and a calculated risk for the provider, who bet on fuel prices and operational costs remaining stable. It was a bet they were about to lose in spectacular fashion. With the cost of fuel, crew, and maintenance doubling, these companies were now legally obligated by contract to fly their clients at a massive, unsustainable loss. We're talking about losing $20,000 or $30,000 on a single flight. It was like a restaurant being forced to sell steak dinners at 2018 prices, while the wholesale cost of beef had tripled. The business model was fundamentally broken. One by one, some of the biggest names in the industry began to buckle under the financial pressure. They abruptly stopped selling their most popular card programs. They added massive fuel surcharges that infuriated their loyal clients. Some simply collapsed, going bankrupt and leaving customers holding hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars on now worthless cards. It was a brutal public implosion that sent a shockwave of distrust through the market. It was a stark lesson in the danger of promises that sound too good to be true. And who was there to pick up the pieces? The on-demand charter broker. Their entire model was built on transparent, dynamic, real-time market pricing. They never promised a fixed rate because they knew the market was alive and constantly changing. When a client asked for a quote, they were providing a real price for a real aircraft in that exact moment. Their honesty, once seen as a disadvantage against the seductive certainty of a jet card, now became their greatest asset. They were the stable, reliable choice in a sea of chaos and broken promises. The pandemic didn't just boost the private jet industry, it fundamentally reforged it in fire. It stress-tested every assumption, broke every outdated model, and catapulted the charter broker from a luxury concierge to an essential logistical linchpin in the global transportation network. They had survived the silence. They had weathered the storm of demand. They had proven their model's resilience and adaptability. The industry was now bigger, wealthier, and more visible to the public than ever before. But this new visibility came at a cost. As the world began to slowly reopen, a new set of questions emerged. Questions that couldn't be answered with a faster jet or a slicker app. Questions about sustainability in an increasingly climate-conscious world. Questions about public perception and the optics of private travel in a time of widespread economic hardship. Questions about whether this unprecedented, explosive boom was just a temporary bubble, fueled by a once-in-a-century crisis, or if it was the dawn of a new, permanent golden age for private flight. The industry had reached its peak, but standing on that summit, it was now exposed to a whole new set of winds, and the storm gathering on the horizon was of a completely different nature. That new storm wasn't one of demand, but of capacity. The industry, having sprinted a marathon, was now gasping for air. The very success that brokers had engineered became their greatest challenge. The global supply chain, fractured by the pandemic, meant new aircraft deliveries were delayed for years. Spare parts for existing jets became as rare as diamonds, grounding planes for weeks over routine maintenance. And most critically, the pilot pipeline had run dry. Seasoned captains were hitting mandatory retirement age faster than new ones could be trained, creating a fierce, high-stakes bidding war for talent that sent operational costs into the stratosphere. The yes machine that had defined the charter boom began to sputter. For the first time, brokers had to tell clients something they weren't used to hearing. No, we can't find a jet for you this weekend. No, we can't get you that specific model. No, we can't honor that price from last month. The cost of a charter flight, once subject to predictable fluctuations, now swung wildly, sometimes doubling in a matter of days. This wasn't just inflation. It was a fundamental breakdown in the supply-demand equilibrium. The golden age had a steep price of admission, and the bill was coming due. This operational crisis forced an evolution. The broker's job shifted from simply finding a plane to becoming a master logistics strategist and a brutally honest consultant. They had to manage expectations with the precision of a surgeon, explaining why a flight from New York to Miami now required a week's notice instead of a day's. They had to creatively source aircraft, sometimes piecing together trips with multiple operators, navigating a complex web of certifications, crew duty times, and maintenance schedules. The spreadsheet and the Rolodex were no longer enough. The industry was screaming for a smarter way to manage the chaos. And that's when the second wave of technology began to crest. This wasn't about simply creating a digital marketplace. That was the last war. This was about optimization, about using artificial intelligence and machine learning to solve the Rubik's Cube of fleet management. New software platforms emerged that didn't just show a list of available jets. They predicted demand. They analyzed historical weather patterns to anticipate de-icing needs. They optimized flight routes in real time to save fuel. Most importantly, they tackled the industry's billion-dollar ghost, the empty leg. For decades, nearly 40% of all private jet flights flew empty, repositioning for their next paying customer. It was a staggering inefficiency, the cost of which was baked into every charter price. Now, sophisticated algorithms began to connect the dots on a national scale. They could see a jet scheduled to fly empty from Aspen to Dallas and match it with a last-minute request from a client in Denver looking to go to Austin, creating a dynamic, discounted trip that benefited everyone. This technology gave brokers a new superpower, the ability to see the entire chessboard, not just their own pieces. They could offer clients options they never knew existed, turning logistical impossibilities into affordable realities. The broker was no longer just a matchmaker. They were becoming an air traffic controller for a private, virtual airline. But as one storm began to pass, a much larger, more existential one gathered. It was the question of sustainability. For years, the private aviation industry had existed in a bubble, largely insulated from the environmental pressures facing commercial airlines. But the post-pandemic boom had put it directly in the crosshairs. High-profile celebrities were being called out for 3-minute flights. The term climate criminal was being attached to anyone stepping onto a Gulf Stream. The industry's image as the ultimate symbol of carbon-intensive luxury became a massive liability. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with better marketing. It demanded a fundamental change in the product itself. And once again, brokers found themselves on the front lines, translating a complex global issue into tangible solutions for their clients. The conversation shifted. It was no longer just about the type of jet or the catering on board, it was about the fuel in the tanks. Brokers became educators on sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, explaining how this biofuel, made from sources like cooking oil and agricultural waste, could reduce a flight's carbon footprint by up to 80%. They partnered with carbon offsetting firms, allowing clients to invest in reforestation or renewable energy projects to balance out the emissions from their travel. Suddenly, booking a private flight involved a moral and ethical calculus. The broker's role expanded to that of a sustainability advisor, guiding clients toward operators with younger, more fuel-efficient fleets, or designing flight plans that favored airports with SAF availability. This was more than just a sales tactic, it was a survival strategy. The industry understood that its future license to operate depended on its ability to prove it was part of the solution, not just the problem. And on the horizon, the promise of electric and hydrogen-powered aircraft, once relegated to science fiction, started to look like a tangible, near-term reality, promising a future of quiet, zero-emission private flight. This convergence of operational pressure, technological advancement, and the sustainability imperative is forging the broker of the 21st century. And it's causing the very definition of the industry to blur. The rigid lines that once separated on-demand charter, jet cards, fractional ownership, and full ownership are dissolving. Fractional companies, seeing the demand, are now offering ad hoc charter services. Charter brokers are creating their own membership and jet card programs to secure client loyalty. The entire ecosystem is becoming a fluid spectrum of access, with the broker at the center, helping clients navigate a dizzying array of options. What model is right for you? Do you fly 50 hours a year or 250? Is consistency more important than price? Is your travel planned or spontaneous? Do you want to reduce your carbon footprint? These are the questions the modern broker answers. They are no longer just selling a single flight. They are designing a bespoke aviation portfolio. Their value is not in their access to aircraft, technology has commoditized that. Their value is in their knowledge, their experience, and their judgment. It's in their ability to know which operator has a sterling safety record and which one cuts corners. It's in their global network that can rescue a client stranded in a foreign country at a moment's notice. The story of the private jet charter broker in the United States is a story of adaptation. From the pioneers with their index cards and landlines, to the digital disruptors with their online marketplaces, to the data-driven strategists of today, they have thrived by standing in the gap, by absorbing complexity and delivering simplicity. They took an opaque, intimidating industry built for the ultra-elite and, through grit and innovation, made it more accessible, more efficient, and more responsive than ever before. The future of private aviation won't be defined by bigger, faster jets. It will be defined by smarter, more sustainable, and more integrated networks. It will be about using data to ensure no plane flies empty. It will be about using technology to make private travel as seamless as summoning a car. And it will be about using new forms of propulsion to silence the engines and clear the skies. Through all of this change, one thing will remain constant: the need for a trusted human guide. Technology can optimize a route, but it can't reassure a nervous passenger. An algorithm can calculate a price, but it can't anticipate a CEO's unstated needs or solve a family emergency. The private jet charter broker rose to prominence not because they sold a product, but because they provided a service rooted in a deep understanding of human desire. The desire for control, the desire for safety, and above all, the desire for the one commodity that can never be bought back: time. And in a world that moves faster every day, the business of selling time will always have a future.